Hey guys, welcome back to class. I have my pattern transferred to fabric already. I have them pinned, and I'm just going to go ahead to add the sewing allowance and the hem allowance, just like I've labeled on each of the panel. I'll be showing this part for the sake of those who have not worked with pattern before. Okay, so the hem line at the allowance there is meant to be 1.5, and this is exactly how you place your tape. Okay, you mark from the edge of the paper downward, align it with the the line there. Then you now extend it forward by the panel seam allowance, which is half for that particular part. That's that line seam allowance, half of an inch. You see the way I'm placing my tape. The waist point is important that you mark the allowance out there. Okay, I had to highlight it there so that I can give it a notch. Then you follow the curve all the way towards the armhole part, then extend the armhole part out like that, and then connect the broken lines. Once you're done connecting the line, next is to add the armhole allowance. So from the line coming from the dart line, you extend out to half of an inch or whatever allowance you added, and ensure that you follow the curve. It is very important. Now at the shoulder point, extend it out by half of an inch and then connect the broken lines. After which you go ahead and add the shoulder seam allowance. It is very important. So from the line coming from the armhole, that's from the allowance, you extend it upward by half of an inch all the way to the neck point. All the edges and angles, ensure that you extend them out. Then connect the lines, then the neckline allowance. So ensure that you follow curves and as they are on the pattern. Having done this, I am going to use the same procedure for the side panel. So currently this is the front panel, and I indicated the bust point, the waist point, so that I can give them notches. You put notches on fabric for balance purpose when you're sewing. So the hem allowance, I started from the dart line, extended down by 1.5, just like I have labeled, and then connect the base. I used ruler here because the base is quite straight. So then I added half inch. So when you're placing your pattern paper on fabric, ensure that you give enough space that will accommodate the allowances for both panels close to each other. So follow the curve with the allowance. I can already gauge my allowances, but if you are a starter in pattern making, it is advisable you use your tape measure. So you can see how I am extending some points out because they are very important. So you can see how I connected the edge of the armhole and the dart line, the intersection. You can see how they meet. Now I will add the side seam allowance. First thing, you want to draw the edge of the pattern, extend it downward before you start adding allowance. And then the waist part, ensure that you mark it out, draw the line out from the waist point. So you make connection up to that point first, then you continue the slant upward to the bust line, same as the underarm point. Extend it out like that. Make sure that you rule it out. Then you now start adding the allowance for the armhole. So you extend it up by half of an inch. I can already gauge, I told you already, but please ensure you use your tape measure. Now look at how I am connecting the angle. Just continue the lines as they are, the shape they took. Continue each of them, the armhole and then the one coming from the dart line. They will meet at a particular angle. So you go ahead and connect the broken lines, follow the curve just as they are, and then you can see how the angle part mate is quite different from when a right angle of a pattern allowance meets. So you have to follow the right procedure. Then notch the necessary part, the bust points, the waist points, they are very important. And I'll go ahead and replicate the same thing. Repeat the same process for the back. The center back allowance is 1 inch, and I've already explained all the allowances. I'll just go ahead and cut. Ensure you do not cut outside the allowances you've added so as not to automatically add excess to your measurement. Now I am notching the bust point. It is very important you do that. See how I did that? That's exactly how you do yours. I notched the waist as well, and I'll go ahead and cut the remaining parts, add the remaining allowances to the back, and we'll continue in the next video. Hello and welcome back. We are about to proceed to sewing now. First, I labeled each panel with paper gum tape, and I'm going to flip to the wrong side and start pinning them together. It is important that you indicate the wrong side like this. I'm using a fabric pen, so it's going to dissolve off later on. You can make use of a chalk if you do not have that. Now the important part, the notches, waist and the bust points, pin them together before anything. Then you pin the armhole point together and it has to align. And look at the way I will be pinning the armhole. It is very important. So you see the side we extend out a little bit just because of how that part is angled. Then have to pin the strategic point. You then go ahead and distribute
with what
the
I have
rest.
taught you in this video, you should be able to make this dress by yourself from scratch to finish, even if you have no idea of how it was
then
done
you
before.
start
Looking at
sewing.
the inside of the dress, looking at the finishing, the details, everything, you should be able to make it. The dress is just
for accuracy. You should try and label
stay tuned
the
to this
allowance,
channel
just
until I
marking
bring
the
another video your
allowances.
way. I remain your
I
one
always
and only
start my
full package
stitching with
fashion
backstage
from your
so
days.
that
See you
it
next
can,
time, and please don't
stay
forget to like,
perfectly, and I follow
comment
the
and
line
subscribe
all the
to my
way.
channel for more juicy content. See you
So
some
if
other
there's
time.
curve,
Bye.
I then change direction towards the curve, but this doesn't really have much curve because there's no that bust contouring. I'll just follow all the way to the bust point with no curve that comes. So since your pins are there, it will be quite easy for you to sew, unlike when you do not have pin. Making use of pins doesn't make you less of a professional. It just makes your work more accurate than when you don't use pins. After sewing that, I went ahead to repeat the same process for the other side. The side panel connecting it to the center. It's just the same process. I have finished sewing here, and I'll go ahead and notch the important part, especially the curvy part, so it can relax well when we turn it to the right side. So I'm using the tip of my scissors. Your scissors should be sharp for you to be able to use the tip, and if you have a notcher, just go ahead and use a notcher. The one I'm holding right here is a notcher, but my own is already getting blunt, so I'll just make use of my scissors. When you notch to the stitch line, but do not cut through. Flipping it to the right side, you see what it looks like. Very beautiful. So we'll proceed to sewing the back panels together. Now you can see I have the back panels labeled as well, very important on the right side though. Then I went ahead to indicate the wrong side with my fabric pin, and then we pin together and start sewing, just like I did for the front. Sewing technique is the same, marking your sewing allowance. I was able to gauge mine already. Then the cuff part, you have to be very careful, pin the notched parts together and then use your hand to ease while sewing. Pin the armhole points together as well. You can see how perfect that place is. So I'm going to repeat the same process for the other side. We have two back sides, two panels on each side, notch the seam lines, and then repeat the same thing. After this, you can see what I have. I will go ahead and press the seam lines open, but before that I will be joining the front to the back. Joining the front to the back, I started with a shoulder seam line. I placed front and back shoulders together, neck point to neck point, shoulder point to shoulder points, and then I stitched by half of an inch, which is the allowance added. Make sure you do not stitch more than the allowance. Next is the side seam. The allowance of the side is 1 inch, so I marked the allowance in just for you to see. The waist point, I pinned them together, marked the allowance in and connected to the underarm point. Then I stitched all the way. Make sure that the edges of front and back aligns. So the line is now being directed towards the hip curve, and then I stitched all the way down to the hem line by the side seam allowance. I'll repeat the same process for the other side, the shoulder and the side. After stitching all the panels together, I went ahead to press the seam lines open. Very, very important. You do this actually on both the wrong and the right side so that everything can lay out smoothly. You'll do this for all the seam lines, even the parts you notched. Now I want to press the curved part of the front. You need a ball like that, ironing ball. And then I open the seam line. You do not press curvy part on a flat surface, so you need ironing ball. And then you press open. Now after pressing the seam lines, the next thing you want to do is measure for accuracy. You place your tape measure at the center back on the bust line, just like this, through the armhole point all the way to the other armhole point and all the way to the back. Record whatever you measure and deduct the bust circumference from it. So here I had 38. The bust is 36, and 38 gives me just the exact allowance I added to for zipper. The allowance is 1 inch on both sides. That's 2 inches in total, and that is what I have excess. And on the waist, you place the tape measure as well and measure all the way to the other point of the waist. In this place, I had 3 inches extra. I mean, that's 1 inch extra to my actual allowance, which I'm going to distribute into the zip allowance. Now the hip part, I measured all the way, and here I measured 41.5. I decided to measure the second time to be sure. The actual hip circumference of the person is 39 inches. Having 41.5 gives me 2.5 inches allowance, so meaning that I am going to distribute it into the zipper allowance. So the essence of measuring is for you to know if there is any extra or shortage from your actual allowance. And here I went ahead to record the values I have. But before I go ahead to sew the zipper, I went straight to turn the neckline with bias fabric. You should already know how to turn necklines with bias. I maintained the actual allowance I added to the neckline, which is half of an inch. But when you're sewing bias, you sew quarter from the the line, the line on the bias. And then I went ahead to trim off the excess allowance there to reduce bulk and to make it easy for me to sew turn inside. Then I went ahead to notch the neckline. It's a curvy part, so it's necessary you notch it so that it can lay perfectly. Then I folded it inside this way to stitch. You edge stitch it 1/8 of an inch. It's just fine. And then you have to be careful while doing this so that you won't have squeezes on the neckline. So my screwdriver is my easing tool. You can use an Armhole. I do have, but I prefer to use a screwdriver. So you stitch all the way to the other side, and after this I went ahead to turn the armhole inside with my bias fabric as well, the bias tape. The same process I used in turning the neckline, was used for the armhole part as well. Very important. But the fact that there is no the bias is not entering the seam line, I have to fold the edge before starting so that I can finish it off neatly. Then I also maintained the sewing allowance and trimmed off the bulk. You can see how the bias overlapped the starting point so that that edge can come out neatly. After turning the neckline and the armhole, I went ahead to hem the dress, and I needed to check
Please
the
like this
length
video,
of the back if they
subscribe,
are equal,
and turn on
so that I will
notification
know
for the
how
next
I'll
video.
fold the hem for balance purpose. Now I had to change to zipper foot so that it will be easy for me to sew my zipper. And then you position your zip on your fabric just by the allowances that is there. Now we have some excess allowance on the waist and the hip, which I will factor it in. The excess on the hip is 2.5, that's 1.25, while on the waist was 3, that's 1.5, and on the bust was 1, that's 1. So I'll just make connection like this and then position the zipper there, and I raised it up by half of an inch to prevent it from extending out of the blouse length. Then you need to pin before you start stitching. The zipper foot makes it easy for you to sew, unlike when you're using the normal presser foot. And I will go ahead and notch the waist point on the zip so that there will be balance on the other side. I'll pin it together with the waist point of the other side. So I'm marking in the allowance. Pin them together first for balance sake. So if there was a seam line at the waistline, there will be balance because of the method I have used right here. So you mark the allowance in all the way from top to the bottom, and then you pin the zipper there. So remember, I raised the zipper up by ½ inch from the first part of the the center back. You make sure that you do the same thing here, and then make sure that the top edge also align. It is very important. Then you go ahead to stitch all the way. Now this part is actually the concluding part of the dress. As you can see, it's quite easy to make if you know the right technique to follow. So I'll just go ahead and finish the upper part of the zip, and the way I finish mine is not the conventional way. I stitch it in such a way that you don't get to see the stitches on the right side of the dress. So it's only going to be appearing on the seam allowance of the zipper, just like this, and I will repeat the same thing for the other side. Now after doing this, I went ahead to press everything, and that is the end of our Armhole Princess Dart blouse making. It's quite easy. I love to see your practicals, and see you some other time. Thank you. Hey guys, welcome back. So I'm sure you've watched the videos and you've learned one or two things. Even myself, I learned because I watched the video alongside with you. Okay, so even though I know some things might still be unclear to you, if you have not taken my basic pattern making course before, if you do not have the knowledge of the basic bodies, but at least you learn one or two things about that manipulation and sewing technique. So if you want to learn more, just take my basic bodies block class. Everything will be clear to you. And we have other courses as well. We have the basic pattern making course, we have the basic dressmaking course. There are two different classes. We have the intermediate, we have corsetry and bridal courses. Then we have the full fashion course, which involves everything we do in our online fashion academy. Okay, you can just go ahead and register for whichever one that is mostly suitable for you. And trust me, if you have been finding it difficult to learn online before, the story is different here. All our students always come back with testimony, which I am very sure that you are going to join those who testify very soon. So guys, I'll see you in my classes. I hope to see you there. I love you. Bye.